For thousands of years, Jews read the Bible, read the Messianic prophecies, and just had to guess. Whereas now it's like, that's what it was. Literally, you walk in Israel today, in 2026, on a daily basis, seeing multiple prophecies being fulfilled. I could walk down my street and meet Jews from Ethiopia, from Russia, from Australia, literally all corners of the earth, in one street. It's literally ingathering of the exiles. Let me start off with immortality, because I think that's a prophecy that not a lot of people talk about. The prophecy in Isaiah says that at first we'll have longevity, living hundreds of years. That's something that scientists are talking about is going to be attainable in 5 years. So basically you get to this point where you could be living for hundreds of years. Zechariah talks about Gaza. It mentions Hamas, and it talks about how they will bring prisoners of Tikva and they will be put under the ground in pits. It literally says that.
Whoa, it's so practical and realistic that it's kind of scary to me, because I feel like it puts a lot on us as Jews now to realize, like, hey, this is what's happening. It's not going to be some magical thing one day. That means that we actually have to do something.
I find it exciting. I don't want to be a spectator to the redemption of the world. I want to be a participant. The point is to be active, to not just sit in the stands. Come participate in the Geulah.
We have the most amazing privilege to hear from my rabbi all the way from Tiferet, from seminary, almost 10 years ago, Rabbi Rabbi Mayer. He is incredibly knowledgeable in Jewish history and Tanakh, and it is really such a privilege to be here with him. Throughout this episode, we talk about Mashiach and Geulah and what our role as Jewish people is today. It's an amazing episode. I hope you enjoy. Rabbi Mayer, thank you so much for being here. You have been my rabbi for over 10 years now, ever since I went to Tiferet, the seminary that you started, and I learned so much. So it's just such an honor for you to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege. And to be honest, I get a lot of nachats, it's such a proud moment to be here sitting on a podcast with an alumna who's doing such great things for Am Yisrael. Your social media presence, your podcast, bringing Eretz Yisrael consciousness to the world, what more can I ask? I think this is so great.
Well, I got it from you, so thank you.
No, I got it from you. But really, it gives us a lot of nachats and makes all of Tiferet, the entire faculty, and everybody very proud.
Thank you.
Hashem should bless you with all the kocho to continue and do great things.
Thank you. So let's start from the beginning. You were not born in Israel, correct?
Correct.
So how did you get here?
So they tell me. How did I get here? I'm going to give you a long answer because I think it's important. Please. I think it's relevant.
Yeah.
So both sides of my family are Holocaust survivors. So my father's family, his parents escaped after Kristallnacht. All of their families, both sides, perished, but they escaped right after to London, where my father was born during the war. Then eventually they made way to Canada. My mother, her side is from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, actually. And all of their sides perished as well, including their son. And right after the DP camps, my mother was born in Prague. And they made their way to Omaha, Nebraska, then Los Angeles. And then in Stern College, my mother and father somehow met. I think my mother was a roommate, invited to my grandparents' house in New York for Erev Yom Kippur Suda. And that's how they met. And they moved to Toronto, and that's where I was born. I guess full turn at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai Hospital. So spiritually and physically, I was born at Mount Sinai.
Wow. Okay, yeah. So you were born, and then
I was.
And so, how did you get to Israel?
Okay, so the reason I gave you the backgrounds of my grandparents is because that's part of the journey. I grew up in Toronto in a wonderful, loving, very wonderful home, wonderful siblings, wonderful parents, wonderful community in Toronto. And it was a very Zionistic community, but Zionist in the sense that we value Israel, but not necessarily we're going to actually live there. Like, we'll go there to visit. We'll send our kids there for their year in Israel. We'll go for a bar bat mitzvah celebration. Maybe if we're lucky, have a vacation apartment, but not actually to live there. And that was kind of my mindset. But at the same time, it was very much a part of my upbringing of the fact that my grandparents and what they went through, even though they never spoke about it, it was always the elephant in the room. It was always somewhere lurking in the background, that awareness, that knowledge whether it was my grandmother having night terrors or something like that. But I think one of my grandfathers had a leg that was 6 inches shorter than the other because of the torture that he went through in the camps. So it was always there, even though they never spoke about it. So I always had this awareness of that their home was in Berlin, where they were so comfortable. My great-grandparents were very prominent, wealthy, well-educated people in Berlin, the community of Germany, and did not expect what was going to happen. And the same with my grandparents in Czechoslovakia. And pretty much the same with almost everyone I knew in my community, which is Toronto is very much a community of Holocaust survivors. So I had this awareness, this kind of unconscious awareness or subconscious awareness that, they had a home, but then they found out that this wasn't really their home, that they didn't belong. And as I got older and I became more educated, I learned about Canada. And Canada, not unfortunately like many other countries around the world, when they had the opportunity to bring Jews, to save Jews, when everyone knew what was going on, their actual policy was no Jews or too many Jews. Whoa. That was their policy before, during, and after the Holocaust. So Canada, which is a huge country with not a very big population, had the capacity to take in certainly, all the Jewish people, but certainly hundreds of thousands without a problem, but they didn't. And I had that awareness in my mind. And by the way, the same is kind of true of the United States to some extent. The famous story of the St. Louis and other stories like that, where America had the opportunity to bring in even those who had permits to come into the United States and then turn them away last minute.
Wow.
There's many stories like that. In fact, my grandparents have a letter. My parents just found it, a letter from the American consulate in Prague turning them away, even though they had a sponsor and even, right? So the American, they had a certain number of Jews or immigrants that they were allowing. They didn't even allow what they allowed legally, meaning they limited even their small amount. So I had that knowledge that, at least in the back of my mind, that, this is a great place right now. Toronto is wonderful. Canada is wonderful. United States is wonderful. But I had the awareness that it might not always be. It's our home for now, but you have to be ready to escape. You have to have a plan B. And in my mind, certainly as a teenager, it wasn't okay, so I'm going to make Aliyah. But it was just that awareness. And it kind of culminated in my year in Israel, when I started becoming more involved in my Torah observance and my Torah education, more serious about my Torah observance, and very much aware and taught by some great rabbis, Benny Eisner, Zichrono Livracha, my Rebbe Rav Machlis, taught me about their love of Eretz Yisrael, taught me about the centrality of Eretz Yisrael in Tanakh, in rabbinic literature, that I, up till then, was certainly not aware of, and certainly at that level. And when I had that love of Eretz Yisrael from the Torah side, I'm like, this is a gift that God gave us. This is our inheritance. This is for us. And this is ours to make it what you want it to be, and maybe ultimately for the Geulah. So, and then the backgrounds of what I had in my family, I was like, this is where I have to be. And thank God I married the most amazing woman. Baruch Hashem, we're celebrating this year our 30th anniversary.
Wow.
And to her credit, it was very, very hard to leave our families. We left everyone behind. We left our parents, our siblings. We just had a baby at the time. And so to take them away from their grandparents and a very comfortable, situation that we had, but to leave that all behind, to go to a place where we knew nobody, where we had no family, we didn't have any, backing or financial backing. And, but determines okay, we're learning of the lesson of the Holocaust. To us, to me, this was how we respond to Hitler. This is our response to the Holocaust. Never again to me and to Melanie. Those are just words. And we felt like those words are not enough to avoid another Holocaust. Wow. But we felt that action was needed. And unfortunately, we see that today. We see that whole education of never again didn't work. It didn't work, unfortunately. But I have to give credit where credit is due. I think I would have caved under the pressure from family to not make Aliyah. There's a lot of pressures of, leaving the family, but also, will I be able to make it? Will I be able to get a job? Will I be able to afford, a house there? Will I be able to make a living? All those questions without any answers. There's no nefesh b'nefesh at the time. It was 1996, 1997, sorry. But thank God Melanie is super strong, and her conviction was even greater than mine. She had a similar background to me, descendants of Holocaust survivors, and she was my rock. And together we made the move. And Baruch Hashem, I think if you ask her, she would agree that it's one of, if not the greatest decisions of our lives.
Wow, that's incredible. So you guys made Aliyah, you said, is that 28 years ago now?
Yeah, correct.
So can you tell me the differences between Israel 28 years ago when you made Aliyah and now?
Wow. It's kind of crazy now looking back to see how the Geulah is unfolding, and to see how Israel, when we came, Israel was a poor country. It was just really at the end of being a third world country. There was no mamilla. There was no nice cars. To call Chutz La'aretz, to call Canada or America cost $1 a minute. They didn't have the American products, that they have now. They didn't have the types of supermarkets and the amenities that are available all over Israel today. It wasn't similar to the experience that you have in, if you're making Aliyah today. It's not that big a difference anymore between the life you live, certainly even materially in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, to here. But then the difference was much more stark. And it was hard, and people were struggling financially. You didn't see wealth. Most people, we had people coming to our door asking for money for diapers.
Wow.
There was a lot of poverty. And it wasn't until late 90s, 99, 2000, when things started to change. And now Israel, thank God, I think the average income per capita is now greater than England and France.
Wow.
It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, thank God.
Wow, that's incredible. So you came here, and what did you do for work immediately?
So I didn't. So when Melly and I came, so we knew two things. We didn't have any other answers, but we had two things that we knew for sure. Number one, we wanted to live in Eretz Yisrael. We wanted to live in the land of Israel and raise a family, God willing, a large family in the land of Israel. Build a home, build a family, so our children won't have to make the hard decisions that we had to make. They won't have to leave their parents and everyone behind. So all the challenges and difficulties we went through, we kind of had in our minds, and Melanie had this mantra of we're doing it so they don't have to. So that's basically what we were kind of our mentality. And number two was we want to help spread the love of Torah, to spread the teachings of Torah, to kind of do what my rabbis did for me in my year in Israel, to spread that love of God, love of Torah, love of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. So I wanted to do that for the Jewish people as well. So I spent the first few years studying. I studied several different yeshivot, and eventually I got smicha. And I started teaching first at a place called Machon Gold. It's a seminary that no longer exists, but it was one of the earliest seminaries in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And after that, in several prestigious places like Midrashet Moriah, Yeshivat Reshit Yerushalayim, Midrashet Lindenbaum. And so I was teaching, running from place to place to place, and kind of eking out a living. But thank God we were very involved in the students at Hebrew University as well. And it was very meaningful. It was very fulfilling.
So I know that, I know you from you being my rabbi at Tiferet. How did that come into play?
It's a great question. To be honest, I never wanted to start a seminary. It wasn't like I grew up, on Purim saying, what should I be for Purim? Oh, I know, I want to be the head of a seminary.
Seminary
you
rabbi.
don't see, you see everyone dressing up, the girls dress up like kallas. The guys aren't dressing up like heads of seminaries. It wasn't on my checklist or my bucket list. But it really came about out of necessity. I was teaching, like I said, boys in yeshiva and young women in seminaries. And I realized that the seminary experience was very different from the yeshiva experience that I had in my year in Israel. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, not in a positive way. Unfortunately, at the time, all the seminaries were in Jerusalem, and none of the teachers, or very few of the teachers, lived near the seminary. And because of the nature of the seminary schedule, as opposed to in yeshiva, they had maybe 30 plus teachers throughout your weekly schedule. I was one of those teachers. So you come in, give a class for an hour or two, leave, come back maybe one other time a week or just once a week. And that's what teachers in seminaries did, as opposed to in a yeshiva for the boys. So you'd be there every single morning for 4 or 5 hours, or every single night for 3 hours. So you built this relationship, and I built this relationship with the boys in yeshiva, Reshit. In 3 days, I probably knew them better than I knew any of my students in seminaries by January.
Wow.
And I realized that is the problem, because in the end of the day, it's the relationships that you create in your year in Israel, which I think are not just what make your year better, but something that you have for life. Thank
Which
God.
I can attest to.
Right. Thank you. I'm honored. But also for myself, many decades later, I'm still close with my rabbi from my year in Israel.
Wow.
I still study with him and ask him questions and ask him for advice. And that was from my year in Israel. And to have that such critical relationship, especially at that time in your life when you're making so many decisions, I think is essential. And I thought this shouldn't just be for boys. The girls need it just as much. If they're going to college, they're going to careers, dating, marriage, having children. They need rabbis too. So that really brought about the idea of Tiferet. Myself and Rabbi Rosner, who's a brilliant educator, we were teaching together at Reshit and also at Ariel Gold. So we would carpool a lot together. He was also at MMY, and he is a very, very talented educator. Yes. And he saw the same issues that I saw, and we both had the same solutions. We said all these problems, I'm not going to go into all of them, but basically the lack of relationships, girls not having a place to go for Shabbat, again, because they're in Jerusalem, and the teachers have other obligations. Also, for the Chagim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, boys would have their amazing inspirational davening in yeshiva. The girls were kind of on their own. Right? This and many other things kind of led us to the conclusion that someone had to open up a seminary in the community where the teachers live. And by doing that, you can address those issues of the relationships. The girls can always come into your house. You can have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur davening together because you're in the community. Right. You can build those relationships. And thank God we've been doing that for almost 22 years.
Wow.
Thank God.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah. Thank God.
So when I was in Tiferet, I think 10 years ago, you taught a class that was extremely popular, maybe one of the most popular classes that everyone couldn't stop talking about. And it was about how we are in the times of Mashiach and that we are in the process of Geulah right now. So I'd love to hear about that. What is your favorite part of teaching that class, and what can you share with us today?
So it's a very good question. It's interesting because I had a lot of questions in my year in Israel. Wide questions about God, about, belief in God, whether Torah is true, how do we know Torah is true? The Christians think they're correct and the Muslims think they're correct. So from where do we get confidence that we're correct?
Right.
I wanted to know, how is Torah emet? And once I achieved that, thank God, so then I started delving into basic fundamental teachings of Torah and Judaism, one of which, of course, one of the 13 principles of Jewish faith according to Maimonides, which is at least 2 of the 13, is belief in the Messiah, belief in the Messianic age and the resurrection of the dead. That's 2 of the 13 main principles of belief according to Maimonides. If you don't believe those, it's heretical, meaning it's a fundamental teaching of Judaism. And if you don't believe, that's very problematic. And so when I would say, wow, this is important, I don't really know anything about it.
Yeah.
But very few people really did. There wasn't a lot of clarity. You would ask one person and they'd say something completely different. And I think it had to do with the fact that a lot of the teachings of Mashiach, both in Tanakh and in the rabbinic literature, some are very esoteric. And I think the prophets were trying to describe something to people living 2,500 years ago to people, 2,500 years later. Right. I was thinking about an example. The Ethiopian Jews, so when they came about 35 years ago, I think 1991, I believe, was Operation Solomon. And when they came, thank God, thousands of Jews from Ethiopia, they had never seen airplanes before.
Wow.
And when they saw this airplane coming to take them to Israel, they were like, oh, this is the bird. This is the eagle coming to get us and bring us.
Wow.
They just thought this was a massive metal bird.
Wow.
And I was thinking, that's in 1991. A prophet's trying to explain something to, that's a difference.
What was the original prophecy?
So the original prophecy says, God says he's going to gather us from all corners of the earth and bring us back. And one of the famous lines is Al Kanfei Nisharim, which is on the wings. It's translated incorrectly, actually, on the wings of eagles. It's actually not on the wings of eagles, because a nesher doesn't exist in Israel. A nesher is actually a vulture. My friend, Rabbi Dr. Natan Slifkin, the director of the Biblical Museum of Natural History, who's brilliant, and he pointed out that nesher is actually a certain vulture in Israel called the griffin vulture. And I'm saying this not just as a National Geographic lesson, because Rabbi Slifkin said that the Israeli vulture, the griffin vulture, is actually the highest flying bird in the world.
Wow.
And flies often at the same altitude as airplanes. So God created the perfect parable to help us understand what we can expect in 2,500 years. Wow. If God said, okay, there's an airplane. What's an airplane? Well, it's this big thing that it's hard for anyone to understand. If 35 years ago, the Ethiopians could understand it, how would we? So therefore, God used the perfect example, a bird with a large wingspan flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet, just like airplanes. And thank God, that's what's happening. And it's incredible to see. I get excited every time I see it.
So that's a perfect example, it seems like, of something that, was said in Tanakh that actually came to fruition from today. So are there any other examples of what that would mean, of like a prophecy that happened so long ago that we can see in our real life today?
There are so many, thank God. You know what? I took upon myself when I started college in Toronto. I was like, what do I want to study? I didn't know what I wanted to do. We're just getting married at that point, and I had really no direction in terms of my career. The typical options in front of me: lawyer, doctor, finance, and none particularly appealed to me. So I was like, you know what? I was already really into study of Mashiach, of the Messianic times, and it didn't seem like a lot of people knew what was going on. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to study world history and politics and see how God is bringing the world towards its culmination, back to the ideal. The Bible starts off with the Garden of Eden, which seemingly is irrelevant to the whole objective of the Torah, but really it's telling us where we need to end up. It's starting off with, okay, this is paradise. We're supposed to get there on our own. And all of the consequences of the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden are going to be rectified in the times of Mashiach. So how are we going to get from Gan Eden to the Messianic period? How is it going to evolve? How is history going to progress and bring us to that point? And so therefore I took political science, not knowing where that would lead. In the end, it didn't lead anywhere, but I did find amazing things happening. Certainly from the period from French Revolution and on, I saw how things were revealing that movement, that progression to Geulah. For example, even the feminist movement. Wow. One of the consequences of the sin of the Garden of Eden, according to Genesis, is that hu yimshalba, that the woman will be subjugated by the man, that she will be subservient to the man. And that was a punishment. According to the commentaries and the Kabbalists, that is supposed to be rectified in the times of Mashiach.
Wow.
And the feminist movement, interestingly enough, began at around the same time as the Zionist movement. So really? God was bringing this progression of the Jews returning to Israel together with bringing or starting the movement to bring equality between men and women. And that's part of what I was focusing on. That's part of what I was seeing. And I was seeing this manifesting in so many ways.
Wow. So this seems like you're describing something very practical. What are... when I grew up and I was learning about Mashiach, I just imagined, kind of like you said, okay, we're just going to eventually end up here. And one of the things that really struck me that I remember 10 years later from your class was that you're like, no, they're going to say on TV, oh, hey, Mashiach is here. CNN is going to be broadcasting, oh, everyone get, buy your tickets on El Al, get to Israel. And then so we can see the Beit HaMikdash being rebuilt right now. So can you talk about what, when Mashiach comes here, is it does it happen in one day, or is it a process, and what does that look like?
So that is one of the big misconceptions I think people have about the redemption. the Talmud in Sanhedrin talks about two options, two possibilities. Be'ita, in its time, which is normal, natural progression, and Bachishana, sped up in maybe more a miraculous way is how it's interpreted. So there are two options. It could be sped up, but the default is a slow, natural progression. And the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Midrash, the rabbis talk about comparing the redemption to dawn, to the rising of the sun in the morning. And it says slowly, just how the sun rises incrementally, which, by the way, is an act of kindness by God. Because I remember when I was in camp in the middle of the night, I don't remember the reason, but one of my counselors came and shined a flashlight right in my eye, right? It blinded me.
Right.
So imagine if it went from darkness to 12 p.m., right? That would that would shake us, that would rattle us, that would unnerve us. And so too the redemption. If we went from 0 to 100, we wouldn't be able to handle that type of monumental change. So therefore, just like the dawn, just like the rising of the sun, the Gemara says, kima, kima, step by step, little bit at a time, incrementally. So it allows us to adjust, and therefore all the Messianic prophecies that thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago seemed supernatural are actually natural because they are coming within the context of scientific innovations or technological innovation that we are used to and see it in our lives, but fulfilling Messianic prophecies.
So do you think that now we can, I guess kind of hindsight could be 2020, like now we understand that this is the process of Mashiach and that it can be something slow and that, you know, these little things are leading to something. Do you think that in previous generations, say before the state of Israel was established, that is something that people could understand?
I think that we are in a very unique position in our generation. Maimonides said in his Mishnah Torah and the laws of Kings, at the very end, which is very interesting that the Maimonides would choose to write about the Messianic age in a book of law, in a book of halacha. But he does anyways. And he says that things won't be so different in the Messianic times. Things aren't going to be like, you know, it's going to be normal life. I mean, I imagine that when I go to, you know, the Kotel, when the Beit HaMikdash is built, maybe there's going to be a Starbucks there, you know, get my caramel macchiato on the way to the temple. We are in a unique position because for thousands of years, like Maimonides said, we're not going to know how these prophecies are going to come about. So don't even bother trying. The only time we will know about how these prophecies will be fulfilled and how they'll come about is when they happen. Until then, don't bother.
Do you think that's why there's not a lot of like text about it?
100%, because some of the are very esoteric. They're parables, like the wings of eagles,
right? Like
this super shofar that is blasting that the whole world could hear, right? Resurrection of the dead, immortality. Those all sound like Hogwarts, supernatural, right? Like fantastical, and they don't really make any sense. But like Maimonides says, but when they happen, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what it is. And I think that is the unique position we are in history. It's a very privileged time that we live in the world where for thousands of years, Jews read the Bible, read the Messianic prophecies, and just had to guess. It just was so strange, so open to so many different interpretations. Whereas now it's like, oh, that's what it was. It's like, now it makes all sense. And thank God we're in a time where I could read the prophecies of the Bible almost on a daily basis and say, oh my gosh, there it is. Literally, you walk in Israel today, in 2026, on a daily basis, seeing multiple prophecies being fulfilled. It's unbelievable. The other day, I was in Jerusalem, and I was with my students, and I was counting the number of cranes that we saw in the northern part of Jerusalem. Wow. And there were about 20 cranes of buildings going on. Wow. Now, this is one of the prophecies of rebuilding Jerusalem. And It's literally happening before our eyes. I can walk down my street of Ramat Beit Shemesh and meet Jews from Ethiopia, from Russia, from Australia, from I don't know, all over, literally all corners of the earth, in one street. It's literally ingathering of the exiles. And I see it right in front of my face. And I can walk a little bit further and I could see a mikveh, a ritual bath from the times of the Hashmonaim. Wow. Right? So we are rebuilding on what was unfortunately destroyed 2,000 years ago. And that every morning I see that fulfillment. I see that fulfillment in our home in Jerusalem. That is the fulfillment of prophecy, rebuilding our homes in Jerusalem. growing our garden, our lemons and our pomegranates when they sprout in our garden. That is a fulfillment of prophecy. When I hear the sounds of a wedding, right, from a hall not far away, that is a fulfillment of prophecy. All of these things on a daily basis that we take for granted, seeing elderly people sitting at a cafe, children playing in the yard, on the park, or even on the streets is the more literal fulfillment of that prophecy. Now it's a bit dangerous, but the point is, all those little things that the prophets described were just the life that we are living now.
Wow. And these are all quotes that you are
saying. Are all quotes, all in Jeremiah, in Isaiah, in Zechariah, in Amos, Ezekiel. All throughout the Bible, you are reading about these very common and very seemingly non-supernatural, just regular life. And that was, I think, the bulk of the prophecy, is that we will return and rebuild our lives here.
Wow.
In fact, Maimonides said, and this is based on a statement by Shmuel in the Talmud, that's the only difference between our lives in the Messianic age and our lives now is that we won't have subjugation by foreign nations. That is the main difference. Meaning, so many of my students are so nervous. What will life be like? Human nature is so change adverse, where we're so nervous about anything different. Right. Even if it's imperfect, we like things the way they are, and we get scared of anything different, right?
Yeah.
But, we're living in such incredible, incredible times. Sorry, you were about to...
No, for sure. I think that you mentioned so many important things, and one of them was the fact that we have like resurrection of the dead and the shofar. Can you explain what that means in these times and how this is coming true?
It's crazy. It's crazy. I think that it's almost a instinctive or knee-jerk reaction for people to be skeptical of technologies, certainly when you're coming from a religious standpoint. Mm-hmm. When I mentioned that human nature is change adverse, especially about technology. And what we are seeing, in fact, the Zohar, the main work of Jewish mysticism, actually said that in the year 1840 of the Christian calendar, of the Gregorian calendar, that the windows of heaven will open and ideas will pour forth into the world. Huh. And that corresponds with the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, wow.
And the Industrial Revolution gave birth to the Western advances in science and technology and medicine that we have today. All has its source from the Industrial Revolution. And many of those prophecies are being fulfilled through those innovations. So, for example, when we read about, especially it's in our prayers every day in our Shemona Esrei, we read, Tikah b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, right? Sound that great shofar to announce our freedom, to announce our return to Israel. And that is actually a paraphrase of the words of Isaiah. And we pray for that every day. And I tell my students, I think it already happens.
Wow.
And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, you weren't alive, and neither was I. But actually, just in the coming days, we're going to be celebrating here all over the world, Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim, 59 years since 1967, when probably the most incredible miracles in Jewish history, certainly of biblical proportions in terms of the miracles of the Six-Day War. And we finally, after 2,000 years of crying and dreaming about Jerusalem, returned to Jerusalem, returned to the Temple Mount. And Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who was the chaplain of the IDF at the time, he had the great privilege of happening to be in the right place at the right time. And he was on the Temple Mount. First time Jews were on the Temple Mount since the Chashmonaim in the times of Hanukkah. And he went down to the Kotel HaMa'aravi for the first time in 19 years that Jews were not allowed in the time of the Jordanians to go to the Kotel. And he blew the shofar. And that shofar was heard all over the world. How? Because of radio, because of television. And today, you can still hear it today by going on YouTube.
Wow.
It's a shofar that can still be heard. In fact, Natan Sharansky, the famous Soviet prisoner when there was the USSR, he said him and the other Soviet refuseniks who were not allowed to come to Israel, who were not allowed to practice Judaism in the former Soviet Union. So he said they heard that shofar on the radio. And they didn't know anything about Judaism, but they knew that there is a prophecy of a shofar being blown that the whole world will hear, B'san nes lekabetz guliyotenu, and will be a banner for the return of the exiles. And he's like, we got to go back. So that actually happened. We didn't know how it was going to happen. How would someone in Australia hear a shofar being blown in Jerusalem? But now we know the answer. Now we know it's technology, it's radio, and it's television. That's how it happened. That's how people in Australia and in Russia and China heard the shofar being blown in 1967.
Wow. That's mind-blowing. And what about the resurrection of the dead?
So let me start off with immortality, because I think that's a prophecy that not a lot of people talk about, but is actually making headlines in the last few days. And then I'll come to resurrection of the dead.
Great.
There is this prominent scientist, Dr. Sinclair, who I think just found out is a Jew. Wow. I did not know until I think 2 days ago. I heard on a podcast that he talked about his grandmother, Vera, who was a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
Anyways, the point being is that they've made great advances in the last 5-6 years in terms of technological progression of being able to reverse human cells in terms of their aging. Meaning they were successfully taking the cells of mice who were blind, who were old, and reversed the life of that cell to as if it was a child. So before they had glaucoma, before they had a disease. So they were basically able to take cells and make them young again. So he had just about 6 months ago got approval from the FDA to do human trials, the first of its kind, human trials on applying this to basically take any cell of a human body and reverse it. And basically the prophecy in Isaiah says that at first we'll have longevity, living hundreds of years. That's something that scientists are talking about is going to be attainable in 5 years. They talk about how we're going to get to a point in the next 3 to 5 years where advancements in medicine and science will be so great that every year you live will basically not subtract from your lifespan because it will keep adding. For example, right now, a year, so that's subtracting a year of my lifespan. But for every year you live, we'll add another year and 2 months, a year and 6 months. So every year you live will take your lifespan much further. So basically you get to this point where you could be living for hundreds of years. So that is already a fulfillment of prophecy and ultimately could bring us to immortality. And that is something that many, many companies, the investments world is pouring billions of dollars into these companies now who are working on immortality. And they say that's something which is feasible within the next 10 years. And that's something that people just laughed at when they saw as a prophecy. And here it is. It's actually talked about not in just science fiction. It's actually a coming and inevitable technology. Now, resurrection of the dead. So I remember, I think it was in the early 1990s, I read a book by Michael Crichton called Jurassic Park. It ended up becoming a very famous movie by a Jew, Steven Spielberg. And it was basically about, at that time, it was a technology in its infancy, but basically taking a stem cell and regrowing it. So basically, the book was based on this possibility of finding, I think, in the tundra of the Arctic, finding a dinosaur and extracting the DNA from that dinosaur. Or I think it was maybe from a mosquito, which drew blood from the dinosaur.
Oh, wow.
And then recreating the dinosaur. And that's how they created Jurassic Park. That's how they brought back the dinosaurs. Now, that at that time was science fiction. But today, it is not science fiction, right? I encourage you to Google the woolly mammoth. Right now, they are working. They already have the technology to do it. It's just a matter of money and whether they should. But they found from the hair, they're able to extract the DNA of a woolly mammoth, which has been extinct for 30,000 years.
Oh, my God.
And they have the technology to actually bring it back, to resurrect an animal that's been extinct for 30,000 years. Now, if you've been to Hebron, and you've been to the Marat HaMachpelah, the Cave of the Patriarchs, so you will probably hear from your tour guide that there was an area in the 80s during the Slichot, in the time period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that they actually sent a young girl, because only a young girl could fit down the narrow hole, into the Cave of the Patriarchs. The Cave of the Patriarchs, what we see now, is built over the actual double cave of Abraham, where Sarah and all the forefathers and foremothers are buried. And she went down there, and she doesn't talk about it. I think she was traumatized. I don't know how smart it was to send a 12-year-old girl into, no. But nonetheless, she was there, and she described what she saw, and she saw bones, and she described the cave. Imagine if we went there now and extracted DNA from Abraham's bone.
That would be
Could
crazy.
That be the technology that brings about resurrection of the dead? It's certainly a possibility. It's certainly an exciting possibility. But whether that is or isn't the way the resurrection will be brought about, I don't know. But it's certainly incredible that at the time of all these other prophecies being fulfilled, that there is the potential within technology, within science today, to resurrect something that's been extinct. So therefore, it's no longer supernatural. It's within scientific progression. It's within something that we have the technological means today to possibly bring about.
Wow. So, okay, to be honest, everything that you're saying, it's so practical and realistic that it's kind of scary to me, because I feel like it puts a lot on us as Jews now to realize, like, hey, this is what's happening. It's not going to be some magical thing one day, or it could be, but like right now, the progression that it seems like it's going in is that it's a slow progression, like Dawn, like you spoke about. And that's a little scary, because that means that we all really have an active part in it. That like, if, we want to contribute to, resurrecting the dead, like we could be scientists and we could do that. And like, that could be a prophecy of Mashiach coming true. If we want to see Jerusalem rebuilt, we can, sell real estate there, and we can do that. And I think that, I guess for me, and maybe to, Jews and people all around the world, it's a scary thought, because that means that we actually have to do something. And how do you think that, I guess going off of that, what is the best way that you think as Jews we can contribute to Geulah and Mashiach?
So it's interesting you say a scary thought. I find it an exciting spot to be in.
I think it just puts like the responsibility on us rather than God.
I would certainly, if you could choose any points in Jewish history, today, right now, in the year 2026, I think I would choose today almost maybe the times of, Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, the very few times where I think that Jews have had a better life experience than right now. We are living in very exciting times. And yeah, maybe that could be scary because, like I said, people are adverse to change and, the unknown. That is scary. But at the same time, when we're talking about Aliyah, so I always felt I don't want to be a spectator to the redemption of the world. I want to be a participant. Would you rather be a fan in the stands watching something monumental like the 7th game of the World Series? Or would you rather be a player bringing your World Series home, right? And maybe hitting the game-winning home run in the bottom of the 9th. And to me and to my wife, it was like, we want to participate in the Geulah. And you're right. What you're saying is absolutely correct. That does put the onus on us because there are things I believe that we could do to help bring it about. In fact, I tell my students, what does it mean to be an Eved Hashem, to be a servant of God? What does it mean to be a Jew? What does God really want of us? And ultimately, I think one of the things that maybe principally the main thing, or one of the main things that we want to do is everyone contribute in the ways that they can with their talents and their abilities to bring the process of redemption forward, to speed it a little bit further. And everyone can do that in some ways. Certainly coming and building your family in your home here, if you're able to, is certainly a very, very important way to do so. To me, I think it's one of the greatest things that a Jew can do. If anyone has that merit, it's, I think, one of the greatest accomplishments. I always tell my kids and I tell my students that when we made Aliyah, my wife and I, so we both said that if my life ended now, if God forbid I passed away right now, I would die with a smile on my face and just be content that I achieved something monumental, that forever, for all eternity, it will be known that Elie and Melanie Mayer were the ones who brought back the Mayer family to the land of Israel after 2,000 years of exile. So there are definitely things that we could do, whether you're a scientist or whether you're a real estate agent, like you pointed out. But the point is to be active, to not just sit in the stands and watch it from beyond. Come participate in the Geulah, on your amazing Instagram feed. So some people pointed out that the things are not perfect, and maybe that there are people who have commented on some of your posts and stories that, things are not perfect in Israel, or pointing out this problem or that problem. And I don't think anyone here would say we are right now in the full redemption. We are not in the Geulah Shlema. We are in the process of that happening. And by you coming here, you can help perfect it, right? Don't just stand on the side and say what should be or what's wrong. Be part of the solution, right? Bring the Geulah closer. Be that Nachshon ben Aminadav who don't just sit and cry by the Yam Suf, by the Red Sea. Be Nachshon ben Aminadav who says, I'm not going to stand here and cry and say, what are we going to do? Should we just go back? Should we just give up on the state of Israel? Oh, why? What was the point of the state of Israel? That's what they did at the Yam Suf. And God said, stop crying, stop praying, just go. And that's what Nachshon ben Aminadav did. And that's what we have to do. We have to step into the Yam Suf. It's not comfortable. The first steps into the pool, right? They're always the worst ones, right? It's cold. You have to splash the water on your knees a little bit to get it wet, right? It's not comfortable, but jump in, right? Or at least keep going in. And then you could make the sea split. Maybe not literally, but meaning you could split the sea for your family. You can open up avenues for members of your family to now come. Thank God Melanie's family, her parents are here.
Wow. 2
of her siblings are here. God willing, the third one and their family on the way.
Wow.
And I think we opened that avenue. And every person who does that opens avenues, not just for their family, but for their friends. You're splitting the sea. Yeah. You're splitting the sea to say, wow, you could do it. I just heard last week about someone who is in finance, and there was unfortunately some very serious incidents of anti-Semitism in their neighborhood.
Oh.
And the moment they just said, okay, we're moving. And he wasn't sure about what job prospects he had. He ends up getting a fantastic job, right, within a week. And their dream is coming true. Actually, it wasn't their dream until a week ago, but it's the dream of the Jewish people.
Right.
And so if there's a will, there's a way. And I think that's the promise of God, that you do your best. Our responsibility is to make our best effort to bring that about, to contribute to the redemption of the Jewish people and not just be a bystander.
Yes, totally. And I remember when I was in seminary, I spoke in depth with you and other teachers there about my aliyah, because I have absolutely no family here. I had no, blood family. Well, I had no, immediate family here. And I was always just, I wasn't hesitant because of that, but my family was a bit against it. And, I remember we even had to, I signed a paper with my parents saying that, if I go to seminary, that I have to go back to America, because it was like, that's just what my parents wanted. And I said, okay, great, I'll sign it. I'll be in Israel. And I remember going into your office saying, like, what do I do? I made a promise to my parents. This is kivud avayim, but I want to stay in Israel. So what do I do? And you were like, okay, I'm going to, I have to call a Gadol Hador, because this is a serious question about respecting your parents. And it took a day. You're like, let's meet in my office tomorrow. And I was so nervous because I was like, but I have to listen to what I'm supposed to do. But I have to also, I want to be in Israel more than anything. And I remember you said that, we were on the phone with the rabbi and you were translating from Hebrew to English, saying that, you can't make a promise that goes against the Torah. So if you make a promise not to be in Israel, that goes against the Torah. And I find it so ironic today that we, sat there in your office asking that question. And 10 years later, literally just a few months ago, my own dad made Aliyah, which is something that he was so hesitant. And we literally had to ask a Gadol Hador about this. And he actually found his way here in just 10 years. And I think that, like you said, when we are able to, when we do God's will, when we, choose what, try and choose the right path for not just us, but the future of the Jewish people, we can really see some open miracles in that. And the amount of people that I know that started to make Aliyah, and they were their nachshons of their family, and how many people followed is really incredible.
Yeah, and what you're doing by this podcast, the social media, those are opening many avenues. A lot of people are talking about Aliyah that weren't. Unfortunately, many are because of anti-Semitism. But I always say it's better to run to Israel than to run away from America or Canada or UK or wherever. And I want to comment on the tears of parents. I don't know who said this, but I think someone attributed it to Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, but I'm not certain. but something to the effect that the state of Israel was built on the tears of parents. Yeah, it was hard for my parents, as it was for yours, as it was for probably almost anyone who made Aliyah. It was gut-wrenching for my parents to take their granddaughter away from them, to only be able to see us, maybe once a year or whatever it may be. It was definitely hard, but they are so proud. Looking back, right? Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, there's tears. But if you don't make those decisions that are hard, you're never going to have anything meaningful in your life, because those decisions are the hardest, are almost always the most meaningful and profound.
Exactly. So kind of jumping back into where we are in Jewish history today, how would you say that we see events like the Holocaust and October 7th in the lens of Mashiach and Geulah?
Wow. Okay, that's a very big question, and I can only tell you my opinion. I'm certainly no way to know, but I think that it's part of our role as believers, as people of the book, to read the prophecies, to read the book and look and see how does this apply, especially like I mentioned at this point in history, when we have this unique perspective, when we can actually not look forward, but look at the present. And with the Holocaust on October 7th, we now have the perspective of looking backwards. And in Ezekiel, there's the well-known prophecy of the dry bones. And when you read the dry bones, read the prophecy of Ezekiel, I believe it's chapter 35, I'm not sure exactly. And it talks about God telling Ezekiel to go to these bones and command it to get up. And Ezekiel sees this whole valley full of bones, so many bones everywhere, the whole valley filled with bones. And all of a sudden, the bones come together, and the sinews, and the organs, and everything, and slowly it becomes a person again. And God instills with it a soul, and it says in Ezekiel that God will do that for the Jewish people. That parable of the dry bones was the Jewish people. And God finishes that parable and tells Ezekiel, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to put a new spirit into the Jewish people. And they will be brought back to Israel, and we will no longer be subjected by the Gentiles. We will no longer at some point be oppressed by our enemies. We will no longer fear being dry bones again. And to me, reading that prophecy was the Holocaust in 1948. There's a picture we have at home of Holocaust survivors who had just got off the boat. I think they were from Buchenwald, only members of their family to survive. And you see them just newly arrived on the shores of Palestine, right before the state of Israel, 1947, early 1948. And there's a picture of them, their bodies, their faces are gaunt, they're emaciated, and they're standing there flexing their muscles, but not just their muscles, because they didn't really have a lot of muscle, but flexing the number.
Wow.
Burned onto their skin by the Nazis and smiling with pride. And I love that picture. I get goosebumps even talking about it still to this day, because to me, that was the fulfillment of the dry bones. That was the new spirit that God put within us. Because those boys from Buchenwald, and I'm sure thousands of others at that time in 1948, when they were fighting for the state of Israel in the War of Independence, they were so privileged. They felt like, wow, we are lucky to be alive, to be able to even die for the Jewish people, to die for the destiny of the Jewish people, rather than die at the hands of the Nazis and their allies in Europe. And to me, that is the fulfillment of prophecy. So that is how I view the Holocaust. I view the Holocaust as obviously one of the worst tragedies that existed. And I don't have any answers as to why it happens, but I do know that we have arisen, and that the fact that we have gone from the lowest points of any nation in history, where 1/3 of our nation was decimated in the worst possible way, and just basically like Job before us, just ignored by the nations, no one there to protect us, no one caring about us, everyone just watching us being decimated. And yet, 3 years later, 3 years after the gates of Auschwitz closed, after the oven stopped burning, we created the state of Israel. We fought off 7 nations. The Jews hadn't had an army in 2,000 years.
Wow.
Since the Chashmonaim, since Hanukkah. We don't know how to fight. We didn't even speak common languages because Jews came from all over the world. Not everyone knew Hebrew. How did we communicate? We didn't even have weapons, right? Because no one would sell us weapons. We had one plane, I think, that would fly around and drop seltzer bottles so it would sound like a bomb. And yet we won. Holocaust survivors took on 7 nations and won. And to me, that was the new spirit of the dry bones. And we're coming to October 7th, you know, the pain is still very fresh. The wound is still open. But when it was, I don't know how many years ago, but maybe it was 8-9 months after October 7th, I came about the 9th chapter of Zechariah. And I was reading there the prophecies. And to me, and again, this is just my interpretation, there are very different interpretations, but to me, on the simple level, the simple translation of the text, I just couldn't stop looking at it. It talked about an enemy from the south and from the north. It actually names the enemy as Hamas, the actual word. And it talks about an enemy in the north, in Lebanon. Actually talks about them, and it says that they will hide out in these big pits where they will seek shelter, just as Hezbollah did. They've had those big fortresses that they built underground, and describes it. And it describes how the enemy in Lebanon will amass all this wealth, which Hezbollah did up north through drug trade, through illegal activities. They had massive amounts of money to buy weapons to harm Israel, and also given missiles and all they needed from Iran. So, and then it describes in the 9th chapter that the enemy from the south, what was then controlled by the Philistines, by the Plishtim, which of course we know in history, many years later, the Romans named Judea, they changed the name as an insult to us, our ancient enemy of the Philistines, which didn't exist anymore at the time, but to kind of stick it in a little bit, they changed the name from Judea to Palestina. That's where Palestine comes from, because the Palestinians, the Plishtim, they lived in Gaza. And Zechariah talks about Gaza. It mentions Gaza, and it mentions Hamas. Wow. And it talks about how they will bring prisoners of Tikva. It says prisoners of Tikva, and they will be put under the ground in pits. It literally says that.
Whoa.
And God says, and I will bring them out of the pits. But even before that, it says that these mongrel nation, like not even human nation, which I think very adeptly, correctly describes Hamas, will charge in to the northern part out of Gaza. And it says it will have to remove all the inhabitants from that area, which is exactly what happened after October 7th. Right, we had to remove all the communities who lived near the border with Gaza. And it actually says that they will take over Ashdod. And that was actually the original plan of Hamas, was to go 20 miles north of Gaza, which would have included Ashdod. And they got close. They were only 10 miles from Ashdod. But it describes that this mongrel nation will come and they will do terrible things. And they will bring those captives back into pits. And they will do terrible things. And God says that I will redeem those prisoners of hope, prisoners of Tikva, like our national anthem, prisoners of hope, right? That's what he called them. And God says, and I will no longer let anyone cross those borders to oppress you anymore. I will no longer let this happen. And I will bring those prisoners out of their pits, and you will destroy their enemy. I will be behind you. I will give you protection. And then it talks about slingshots bringing down the warrior's bow. And to me, that was like the Iron Dome, David's sling. It's literally called David's sling because they're like slingshots shooting down missiles from Hezbollah, Iran, and Hamas. And it literally describes exactly that. And then at the very end of the chapter, it talks about how God, after that, will bring us prosperity. And one of the remarkable things, I think you had mentioned it once in your Instagram, how it's remarkable how since October 7, 2023, when a huge percentage of the workers in Israel's economy have gone to serve in the army for months and years over the last 3.5 years or so, who businesses have closed, Families have suffered. Economies, certainly you would expect to suffer significantly. But actually, if you had invested in Israel on October 7th, or October 8th, or 9th, you would have probably made about 20% on the market. The economy has flourished, which doesn't make any sense. And literally exactly what it says in the 9th chapter of Zechariah. Is that what Zechariah was referring to? I don't know. But certainly I read it, that gives me hope. That gives me hope. And I think that as terrible as it was, and as tragic and horrific as it was, and that pain, I don't think anything can really, numb that pain. But to know that God has our back, and at the end of the day, we will be victorious. At the end of the day, that evil will be destroyed. That, yes, there will be the beepers, and there'll be the June 12th, and there'll be the spectacular attacks where hundreds of Israeli Air Force planes will do sorties over Iran for 2 weeks, and not one will malfunction or be shot down or whatever. It doesn't even make any sense. But over 200 planes, not one of them had any issues the entire time. No one shut down, no accidents, no malfunctions, no problems with the engines. How many times have you been delayed on a plane on the tarmac because there was some mechanical issue?
Like 50% of the time.
Right, and it didn't happen. It was unbelievable. So that gives me hope. That gives me comfort to know that, yeah, we go through rough times, and we've gone through rough times throughout our history, even back in Egypt. Even in the redemptions that we've been through, there was pain, whether it's in the Purim holiday, whether Pesach, right? We talk about the suffering that we went through even in those times, and it's painful. But for some reason, that is part of the redemptive process. Why, I do not know, but we do know how this ends. And I think, you look at the United Nations, they release a happiness index, and Israel is rated in the top 10. Israel is, I think, number 8. Mm-hmm. Number 8 in the world in happiness. Now, a lot of people come to Israel and be like, there's no way this is the happiest people in the world, right? And certainly you would imagine a country which is at war almost perpetually since its inception. Right. How does it make any sense that they're happy? But to me, it's because we know we're the Am HaNetzach. We're the eternal nation. We know the end of the story. And if you know the end of the story, then you can endure some of the pains and the growing pains along the way.
Everything that you're describing, it just seems so obvious when you're saying it. It's like, well, obviously that's the connection. Obviously that's what the prophecy meant. Why do you think so many people are so hesitant to believe it? Why is no one talking about this?
Well, in terms of some of my interpretations, I'm sure there are many who can easily disagree because there are some things which are open to interpretation, but there are some things which are not, right? Like, for example, the Talmud says that the surest sign, the most positive sign of Messiah's imminent arrival are the fruits and vegetables of the land of Israel. And you actually see, Mark Twain was famously here, wrote about how the land was desolate. And then now, thank God, where we export so many different fruits and vegetables all over the world. You go to the Shuk of Machane Yehuda, unbelievable. We're one of the leaders in agriculture in the world. The cows of Israel produce more milk than any other cows in the world. What? We're the land of milk and honey, literally milk, right? It's unbelievable. It doesn't make any sense. So when you look at that and you see that, wow, for the first time since the first temple period, that we are about to have the majority of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and the prophecy of that this Torah center of the world will return to Jerusalem as it surely is today, those are obvious facts. Those you can't dispute. Mm-hmm. So how do you not see those things? That is frustrating, I have to admit. There's a teaching in the Talmud that says, Ein bal hanes makir b'niso. That sometimes when you have a miracle happen to you, sometimes you don't recognize it as a miracle. Mm. It's like as a parent, and surely you see with your children, you don't see them day to day how they grow. But when a grandparent comes to visit and they haven't seen them in 6 months or a year, they're like, oh my gosh, you've grown so much. But you don't notice it because you're seeing it on a daily basis. So I think that's part of what the Gemara tells us, that it's hard for us to recognize these miracles, which they are the greatest miracles. It's indescribable. And yet we don't see it because we're in it. If you walk up to the Empire State Building, it's right in front of your face. You think, oh, it's right in front of your face. You can see the Empire State Building, but you can't. Even if you walk backwards a block or two, you still won't see the Empire State Building. You have to walk back like 30, 40 blocks until you can see the entirety of the Empire State Building. And I think that's the challenge that we have today because we're in it. That light is shining bright, right? So it blinds us.
Right.
That's why I think, and that is why there's one of my favorite prayers. We say, "V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion." We also say, "Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir v'nizkech hulanu meira la'ro." God says a new light will come to Zion, and may we merit to see it. Why do you have to merit to see it? If it's light, then shouldn't everyone see it? So I think that is telling us that in the times of the Messiah, in the times of the Messianic age, it won't be clear. It won't be so clear. You have to kind of open your eyes and take a few steps back, zoom out, like in Google Earth, like zoom out so you can see the bigger picture because right now we're blinded a little bit because the light is so strong. It's the light of Geulah.
Wow, that is so powerful. And I feel so privileged to be living in this generation and, trying to open my eyes to see it because I know that every day, like as I was driving here, I'm seeing like you said, like construction and traffic, which is really, as you said, like a bracha that there's so many Jews in Eretz Yisrael that is like, that are rebuilding it. And it's really like, there's miracles every day that I pass that, I don't recognize. And I think that like you're saying that is the story that is happening to Jews all around the world.
I have to give credit to my rabbi, Rabbi Mayer, because I was in the car with him. I think this is what you're referring to. I was in the car with him once and it was terrible traffic. Like it wasn't moving bumper to bumper and everyone's honking and, traffic could be stressful at times. And Rabbi Mayer had an appointment that he was getting to and he was going to be late. And I felt that. And I felt that stress. And he saw that I was agitated. He's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "You're going to be late. I feel terrible. There's traffic." He goes, "So you remember the prayer that we say on the 9th of Av, on that terrible day, which we've been marking since the sin of the spies in the desert, the day that the 2 temples were destroyed, Tisha B'Av? Do you not remember the prayer where it says that Jerusalem will be a city that is desolate, Ir Shomema Me'en Yoshev, that is desolate with no one living in it? Now look at Jerusalem. There's so much traffic. Traffic is literally a fulfillment of that prophecy, right? So, if I'm in Toronto or New York or Los Angeles or London, I'm sitting in traffic, there's no reason to be, celebrate or to not be annoyed. Here in Israel, the traffic is amazing. Wow. Now, I was once parked somewhere and with my rabbi and he was running in, he goes, "If someone comes, a policeman comes and says you can't park here, wants to give you a ticket, tell him it's your great privilege and honor to be able to contribute to the city of Jerusalem."
Wow.
So it gives a different perspective for sure.
Amazing. Okay. So now before we end, let's do like a rapid fire series of questions. So my first one is, what is one word that describes this generation of Jews?
Wow. Resilience. This generation is unbelievable to see what our boys, what we see of our sons and our daughters and their friends, what they've been going through the last few years in Lebanon and in Gaza, Syria, Iran, and to see them come back and just live their lives is really just unbelievable to see. It's unbelievable to see.
What is one thing that you think diaspora Jews misunderstand about Israel?
Okay, I have to apologize to your listeners if this could come off as harsh, and I don't mean it to, because I certainly don't pass any judgment on anyone. Everyone has their challenges. Everyone has things that they're working on. And just because maybe I'm successful in one thing doesn't mean that I should expect everyone to be the same. But I really think that we should start to educate at least our children, the next generation, in how we phrase things in our language. Language is important. For example, I try to correct my students whenever they say, "I'm going home," referring to America. I always say, "Oh, you're going to Yerushalayim? You're going to, that's so nice. I thought you were going to Muncie for Pesach, right? I thought you were going to Florida." And to get them to change. Now, of course, I knew what they meant, but my point was to educate them, say, your home is Israel, right? Okay, you're living in Boca, right? Okay, you're living in the 5 towns. That's fine, wonderful. But don't think that's your home. That's your temporary dwelling. You're visiting Boca. You're visiting Toronto. You're visiting London. You're visiting Melbourne. But your home is in Israel, right? And I think that we have to change that orientation of what is home and what is not. And unfortunately, my father used to say, still says it sometimes, that sometimes we need the anti-Semites to remind us of who we are and where we belong. And I think that maybe that's what's happening now. I don't know if that's the reason, certainly not. It's horrific, and I hope it stops. But I think it's a little reminder for a lot of people of where our home really is. And for Jews all over the world, you should be blessed, and God willing, you should prosperous, and the community should continue to be wonderful Torah communities and do lots of beautiful things, and as they are doing. But they're not home. Refer to Israel as your home, and refer to America or wherever you are in the world as your temporary place of dwelling. And you should be appreciative and grateful to that nation and to your country of origin for giving you, that freedoms that you have and the space to develop those communities. But it's not home.
What is one pasuk or Torah idea that you think is especially relevant today?
Wow, that's a hard one. I have to say there's one of my favorite verses is the very, very ends of the 9th chapter of Amos, where it says, V'shavti et shavut ami, that God says, I'm going to return my nation Israel. And he says, and they will build their homes, and they will plant their vineyards, and they will drink their wine. And to me, that just is such a beautiful thing to be able, it's so simple, but something that you can literally open your eyes in the morning and see on any daily basis. And to see that despite everything, despite nonstop aggressions and terrorism and wars, and people, we're only 0.01% of the population, and the whole world seems out to get us, out to destroy the Jewish state. Iran, against their own interests, spending billions of dollars instead of on their own people, trying to annihilate us. And the same things what the Egyptians did, and what Lebanese and the Syrians and the Jordanians, they've, thank God, I think, learned their lesson. But they're out to get us. They're out to destroy us. And yet we're still here. And not only that, just similar to the Jews in Egypt, the more they afflicted us, the more we prospered, and the more we multiplied. And thank God, I think that's exactly what's happening. The more they try to get us, the more prosperous we become, and the more come back, and the more that are born. And thank God we're at that mark, at the 50% mark, where we'll have the majority of the Jewish people in Israel.
Wow. So I guess kind of on that note, what is a moment that you have witnessed recently that you would say, this is the next chapter of Tanakh? We are living through history.
That is so hard. Because there are so many things, from the simplest things like we spoke about. I was with Tiferet, with my students on Yom Ha'atzmaut in Gan Soccer in Jerusalem, and just seeing thousands upon thousands of kids and teenagers playing and celebrating, and literally that fulfillment of prophecy, and that gave me so much joy. But then there were the grandiose things of the beepers. Right? It's like something you'd read out of the Bible, something you read out of Tanakh. It doesn't make any sense. Seeing thousands of missiles like coming at our state and just being shot out of the sky. Imagine, someone's, God forbid, taking a gun and shooting at you from 1,000 miles away, and someone else takes out a gun and shoots and hits that bullet that's coming at your head. What are the chances? And yet somehow we're able to do that. That blows my mind. But to me, it's really, again, those soldiers and those hostages who, I don't know how they do it. I don't know where they get their strength. I know they get it from God, but they're tapping into something that is beyond this world. They're tapping into something divine. They're tapping into the promise of the eternality of the Jewish people, that we are the Am HaNetzach. They're tapping into this amazing ability of the Jewish people to not only survive, but to thrive. Rabbi Akiva, it says in the Talmud, he went with his colleagues to look at the destruction of the temple. And all of his colleagues, of course, are crying, as they should, seeing the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Akiva starts laughing. And they thought he lost his mind. And they said, Rabbi Akiva, what are you doing? He goes, I'm laughing. What are you doing? They're like, we're crying because that's the normal reaction to seeing the destruction of the temple. And he said, so why are you laughing? He goes, I'm laughing because just as the prophecies of destruction have come true, so I know that the prophecies of redemption will now come true as well. How we can go from the Holocaust to the state of Israel. How we can go from the 9th of Av to Tu B'Av. Is how we can go from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut. That resilience, that ability that I see embodied by our soldiers, by our chayalim, by the hostages who, while in Gaza, under torture and in tunnels of Hamas, in the worst possible place in the universe to be in, and yet singing Lecha Dodi on Friday night together, coming up with the Arabic version of Shalom Aleichem so they can sing it on Friday night. We are the most incredible nation. We are just, it's so beautiful. We are the Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, and it's a privilege to see these kids, to be able to go under the chuppah, to see them at the wedding, some of them with missing limbs, or saying a prayer for their best friends who died a few weeks before in battle, and yet still being able to dance and celebrate their wedding, and to see them dance with so much love and happiness and joy. To me, that is, I can't even put words to describe the excitement, the love, the hope, the promise that brings within me. It's just, it's very powerful. And there's so many, it's hard to choose.
So to end off our podcast, what is one message that you would like to share with the Jewish people?
One message. I think we can all learn from you. I think that everyone has a voice. Everyone has ability. Everyone has their part to contribute to the redemption of the people. Whether it's the moving to Israel, if you're able to, whether it's by increasing your Torah learning or spreading Torah learning, whether it's acts of kindness, whether it's starting an organization to help people in need, whether it's it's increased prayer. Everyone can do something to bring the redemption a bit closer. Have more children, have big families, right? That is an amazing thing, right? Anytime you're making a decision and you ask yourself, what would Hitler say about this? I know this is a bit morbid. This is what goes out of my mind. And if it's like you see Hitler like losing his mind, you're like, wow, yeah, do that. Do that. Right. And what would the anti-Semites marching in the streets of London and Toronto, what would they think about me doing this? And you see them going berserk, do that. Right. Make those hard choices that are maybe intimidating, maybe overwhelming, and certainly challenging. Whatever it is, think big. Don't sell yourself short, because all those hostages, all those chayalim, they're just regular people. These are the giburim. These are heroes of the Jewish people. And you see them, they're like, some dweebs in physics class that I saw in high school. And he's like flying this $50 million jet.
Wow.
You see this like lanky yeshiva kid, and he's with the M16, and like he's just charging at the enemy. We have this power that God put within us, this ability, and we have the tears and the prayers of thousands of our ancestors before us to back us up. And so therefore, even if you don't think you have it in you, you do. So tap into that and make bold choices to bring the redemption a little closer.
Wow, that's so beautiful and inspiring. And all I can say is thank you so much for sharing your Torah and your wisdom with us. And it was really such an honor to have you. So
thank you. And may God bless you, that you should continue to be doing great things for the Jewish people, to bring Aliyah awareness and Eretz Yisrael, the love of Israel consciousness to the world. And God willing, your voice should spread.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.